Oh, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness, what a nice warm welcome. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for such a wonderful warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And Stephanie, thank you for your very kind words of introduction. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be with you and your wonderful mother today and all the others who are supporting this great program. It's just a privilege for me, and also to be here in this beautiful weather. You know, I had to dig out from a foot of snow in Washington to start my trip. But Stephanie, you're in 10th grade, and I couldn't help but think about my time back many years ago when I was living in Massachusetts. We've been discussing that over lunch today. I had gotten a master's in education, and so I taught 11th grade history in Melrose High School in Massachusetts, and it was a great experience for me, and I learned a lot from those days. So I feel strongly about education today and making sure that we restore our public schools to greatness all across this country. But certainly you have excelled through this program. You've done a beautiful job, and we're going to be cheering you on now as you achieve success through your college scholarship and, of course, move into interior design and architecture, right? That's wonderful. I wish you were there already. You could help me because we're going through a renovation right now. I'll just sort of veer off for a moment and tell you about it, because when I married my husband, the Senate was in full swing at that time, and I was serving on the Federal Trade Commission, and Bob said, "Elizabeth, just move in to my apartment, and then we'll find what we want at a later time." Almost 25 years later, we're still in the same tiny apartment. And, you know, suddenly the walls begin to close in on you, and you think, it really is time to do something about this. So we decided to buy the apartment next door and go through the walls. So we've been living in a hotel while this has been going on, and I need a lot of help with interior design and architecture right now. But you might be interested to know that the apartment that we bought is Monica Lewinsky's apartment. Our next door neighbor. Right. So if you all want to come and take tours later on, you're welcome to come. But it is indeed an honor for me to speak to a gathering of people who are committed to such a worthwhile cause. This is a wonderful program, and it's one that's very near and dear to my heart, as we've been discussing at lunch today. My mother is almost 99 years old. She'll celebrate her 99th birthday on May 22nd. And so when she turned 90, my brother and I wanted to do something to honor her. And we felt here we've had such a wonderful mother, and she's the kind of person who's just constantly reaching out to young people. She doesn't even know she's doing it. But I call her every day, and usually there's a young person there, you know. And I made a list, and it was about this long, of all these young people that she visits with, and they come to see her. And I said, "Mother, did you realize you really got quite a program going here?" And she said, "No," she said, "you know, these young people are our future. They're our most precious asset." And she just does it sort of automatically, you know. She's a great grandmother in the real sense of that word, grandmother. So she's been mentoring these young people. So we decided to establish a program for her. I was then serving as president of the Red Cross. For young people, we had five high schools who would recommend to us young people to take courses at the Red Cross which would improve self-esteem. Courses like CPR, first aid, water safety, the whole variety of Red Cross courses. And when you get certified, that does give you a great sense of accomplishment. And then they perform 50 hours of community service, and if all of that was accomplished, the young person gets a scholarship to college. So mine is just a tiny program, but it really does parallel the same sort of concept that you have in this wonderful program. So that's why I say it's very near and dear to my heart, Mike. And also, when I think about the mentoring aspect of it, as Secretary of Labor, I didn't have a higher priority than mentoring young people, because we felt that this could make such a difference in so many lives. And we used to call on people in the business community, corporations, to allow 10% of their workforce time off from work to go into the high schools particularly and mentor young people. And I remember the late Bill Lee, who was the chief executive officer of Duke Power Company in North Carolina. And Bill said, yes, Elizabeth, I'll commit 10% of my workforce to mentor. And he said, by the way, my wife and I, every Thursday at 10 o'clock, do exactly that. And so he was already into it. He said, I even plan my business travel around that 10 o'clock commitment. And so he understood the importance. And indeed, I think this is a wonderful aspect of what you're doing because, you know, we are so fortunate. Look around this morning. Here we have this beautiful luncheon. All of us have wonderful opportunities ahead of us to make a difference. And we are so blessed in this country, aren't we? We are blessed to be a blessing. We've received that we might give. And certainly, this is a wonderful way to give back. Exactly what you're doing, and I just wish you all the best as this program continues to grow and thrive. Now, I was asked to speak a bit about my life experiences and what has influenced my career through the years. And let me just say that it was 1 year ago this month in January when I decided to leave the American Red Cross to pursue a run for the presidency of the United States. And it was a great year. It was an incredible experience. It really was. And during the question and answer period, if there's anything you'd like to ask me about it, I'd be happy to answer because I'm going to kind of move fast beyond that and talk about some other things right now. But one of the things that I talked about on the campaign trail was values and the importance of personal responsibility and the kind of values that have made this country great, on which our culture was built. And I mentioned the good old days. You know, when you could leave your keys in the car, when you didn't have to lock your front door. Remember those days? Well, after the campaign was over, a lady wrote in, and she said, Dear Mrs. Dole, there's still places where you don't have to lock your door in America, even in your husband's hometown in Russell, Kansas. She said, my husband and I live in California, and we wanted to drive through to see my mother in Garden City, Kansas. And so we have 4 children. We don't have much money. We just packed the children in the car, and we started driving from California to Garden City, Kansas. We didn't stop at motels. Well, she said, by the time we got to Russell, Kansas, the kids were very much in need of a bath. And so she said we went to Aunt May's house. And she wasn't there, but the door was open. It was unlocked. So we went in, we gave the kids a bath, we freshened up, and then we fixed some lunch. And finally, we began to look at our watch and said, you know, Mother's expecting us, we better get on the road. So they left a note. Dear Aunt May, sorry we missed you. We'll look forward to seeing you on the way home. Thanks for the hospitality. Well, that night in Garden City, Kansas, they're telling her mother this story. And the mother looks at her daughter with horror and says, oh no, did I forget to tell you Aunt May moved away to Kansas City? Here's the letter. This is a copy of the letter. Isn't that incredible? And the last thing, I mean, can you imagine coming home and somebody's been in your bathtub, in your kitchen, all through your house, you know? And the last sentence says, Mrs. Dole, that wasn't your husband's house, was it, that we visited? I'm going to have to find out whose it was because that really is an incredible story. But so many interesting things like that happen on the campaign trail. You get lots of letters, you know, that just give you a real chuckle, and you meet wonderful people everywhere. I met only one rude person in all the months of campaigning, and that person was not from Florida, I might add. But speaking of my husband, in the early days of the Reagan administration, I served as assistant to the president for public liaison, and I was charged with rallying support for the president's agenda. And one evening, my staff and I were meeting to divide up the names of senators who'd not yet taken a position on one of the president's legislative initiatives. Well, the session came to an abrupt end when I said that I was going home to cook a candlelight dinner. And my deputy, Red Cavaney, said, Elizabeth, isn't it a little early to be going home? It's only 6 p.m. He said, don't you want to finish targeting those undecided senators? I said, Red, I don't think you understand. Tonight, I'm targeting Bob Dole. Well, I want to tell you that Bob did cast his vote the way I wanted him to. I won his vote with that candlelight dinner. It was very successful. But I also want to assure you that I never tried it out on any other senator, okay? Well, the art of persuading senators is just one lesson that I learned in my years in the nation's capital. And today I have been asked to share with you, as I mentioned, a few of the insights that I've gained along the way about organizations and people, and a few observations about how America has changed and how we must change in the future, because I think we would all agree that the only constant is change. During my career in public service, I've really had three very distinct missions. At the Department of Transportation, I was charged with overseeing America's material resources, highway construction, air traffic control, shipbuilding. We sold the government's railroad, Conrail. It took 3 years of tough, hard work selling that railroad, but we were able to sell it for almost $2 billion, which helped to reduce the deficit at that time, and we were thrilled with that. And then as Secretary of Labor, my priority was America's human resources. As I mentioned, the mentoring program and trying to improve the skills of our workforce, helping to resolve a very, very bitter 11-month coal strike. And then at the American Red Cross, it was inner resources, trying to convince people they should give not only of their time volunteering for the Red Cross, but also their money, because Red Cross is dependent on charitable donations, of course, and also their blood. Now, how do you like that? Someone asking you for your blood, your time, your money, you know. But perhaps the biggest change that I've witnessed during my career is the role of women, both in Washington and in the private sector, in the workforce. And let me say that I don't think there is a more important career than that of mother and homemaker and volunteer. Those who are raising a family of wonderful future citizens, what a great career that is. And I don't think we give our stay-at-home moms enough credit, do you? Because they're doing a great job raising the next generation and volunteering, and that's what certainly made this country great. But in my case, of course, my career has been in the marketplace. So I want to share just a little bit about my experiences with you. While most women have not reached the millennium, particularly in failing to equal the earnings of our male counterparts and in the disturbingly low increase in the number of women in top management positions, there are other signs that women are playing key roles in the revolutionary change in America's workforce today. Women-owned businesses are the fastest growing segment of the United States small business economy today. About $3.1 trillion a year is being brought in by women-owned businesses. Isn't that incredible? And they're hiring more people, more employees than all the Fortune 500 corporations combined worldwide. So it's really quite a record. And as women enter the workforce in record numbers, they bring with them unique skills. For example, dealing with needs, issues, and market forces that are often not clearly defined. Rebecca McDonald, who's the former president of Tenneco's natural gas marketing subsidiary, points out women have a higher tolerance for ambiguity because we're always responsible for tending to the emotional needs of others, which can be very fluid. We learn to read between the lines and come up with creative solutions for accommodating people. Now, in my case, I had a baptism by fire when it came to searching for creative solutions. I had finished law school and had left Massachusetts to go to Washington to work in the government, but I wanted to take cases for indigents as my charity work for people who could not afford a lawyer. But there was one problem. When I was attending Harvard Law School, I did not take trial practice. So I thought, I'll just go sit in the courtroom and I'll observe, and I'll kind of learn my way around the courtroom. And at that time, Washington was holding court at night, because there was such an overload on the courts that they decided for 90 days or 90 nights, let's hold court and see if we can't alleviate some of this overload. So one night I was sitting there, the man next to me, I didn't know him, but he happened to say, that judge who's just appeared on the bench is the toughest judge anywhere in the Washington area. He just loves to beat up on the young lawyers. He just bounces them off the walls to toughen them up. He had no more said that than Judge Buddy Beard looked down at me, and he said, who are you? And I said, my name is Elizabeth Hanford. And he said, what are you doing here? I've seen you here 3 nights. And I said, I'm observing, Your Honor, so that I can take cases for indigents. Miss Hanford, are you a member of the D.C. bar? Yes, sir. Come up here. I have a case for you. I said, no, I'm not ready. He said, Miss Hanford, if you're a member of the D.C. bar, you're ready. Come up here. Now, I had about 15 seconds to decide what to do. And my thought was, well, if I'm going to practice in this area, I'm going to have to, go before this judge often, and I better not get on the wrong side of him today. So I got up and I went to the bench, and he handed me the information slip. And when I opened it up, I was to defend a man who was accused of petting a lion in the National Zoo. Okay, now what do we do? Well, one of the detectives walked over and he said, Miss Hanford, you probably don't know where the cell block is, do you? I mean, this man's locked up now for petting a lion. And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, let me take you down. It's under the courtroom. So down we go on the elevator. Now remember, this is 1966. And these men hanging on the bars in that cell block had not seen any women in their cell block. As I was walking through, I kept calling out the name, Mr. Marinas, trying to find my defendant. And these men started to clap and chant and do all these things. I mean, it was really pretty scary, And finally, one of them got the idea. He said, hey, man, she's your lawyer. And did they think that was funny? A woman lawyer, 1966. So finally, I found Mr. Marinas. The problem was he spoke almost no English. And I said, I can get you out tonight. This is not the most serious crime. But under our system, you must come back in 3 weeks to stand trial. And that gave me 3 weeks to learn how to have a trial, right? Well, when he finally began to pick up a little bit of what I was saying, he said, no, I leave. I go to New York. I never come back. What do I do now? Well, about that time, the U.S. Marshal walked up and he said, Miss Hanford, Judge Beard is ready for you. And I said, well, I'm not ready for Judge Beard. The defendant doesn't have the foggiest idea what I'm doing. He doesn't understand. He said, Miss Hanford, it's Judge Beard. You'd better come upstairs. So I got on the elevator. I went up. And when I got off, all these people surrounded me. And they said, what are you going to do with this case? What are you going to do with this case? And I said, well, I can't leave this man locked up for 3 weeks on the charge of petting a lion in the zoo. If I let him out, he's going to skip town, never come back. So I said, we're going to trial tonight. Although, I said, I have never seen a trial except on Perry Mason. Well, we get into the courtroom, and here we are. These people surrounding me had begun to write it down. And I thought they were court personnel, Well, it was the Washington Post. It was the evening news, the Star. We then had 3 newspapers, And I said, please don't write this down. I thought you were court personnel. And you know what they did? They just wrote even faster. They couldn't wait to get this down, So we're in the courtroom, and the situation is this. There are 200 people there that night. The entire Washington press corps is there. The defendant doesn't have the foggiest idea what's going on. His lawyer, me, has never seen a trial except on Perry Mason. And I look over, we've got the toughest judge on the bench. I look over at the U.S. attorney's slot, and guess who's going to prosecute this case? Mr. Lee Freeman, #1 in my class at Harvard Law School, editor of the Harvard Law Review. I mean, have you ever heard of such a stacked deck? Really? It was amazing. I just wandered in that night as a private citizen, and here I am in the midst of all of this. Well, by the grace of God, and I do mean the grace of God, I won that case. And this is how I did it. When you go into a national zoo anywhere in America, look at the plaque. There's a plaque there on the wall that states the law. And the statute reads that you are not to annoy or tease the animals in the zoo. Now, tell me, without the line there as a witness, how do you know if he was annoyed or teased? You can't prove it, right? So I got him out. Oh. Oh, I'll tell you, Lee Freeman nearly had a stroke. He was very upset about that. He really was. He kept saying, but Your Honor, this man was found in the antelope cage 3 weeks ago. And I thought, take my victory and run, right, before I get in more deeply here. My next case was armed robbery. But it was a great experience for me, a learning experience. And while I was certainly challenged by my courtroom experiences, I think I decided pretty early on in my days in Washington that I was going to bypass the full-time practice of law and instead seek a career in public service. Like many others of my generation, I regarded public service as a noble calling, as a chance to really make a difference in the issues of our time. Some said back then that I had stars in my eyes when it came to my desire to work in government and public service, and perhaps I did. But my years as a servant of the public were everything I'd hoped for and more. And that's something that I share as often as I can with young people like Stephanie. Because, you know, over the years, Americans have grown increasingly disenchanted with our government, right? And one of the things that was important to me on the campaign trail last year was to try to encourage our young people to realize that this also is a great way to give back. Public service. It is a noble thing to do, but so many are turning away today saying, I don't want anything to do with that, you know. I think so many good people are not willing to go into public service, government service, or to run for office today. And we've got to turn that around. Remember the words, I'm from the government and I'm here to help? It gets a laugh every time these days, doesn't it? But it was not that way when I started out. In fact, at the end of the 1950s and the beginning of the 60s, when Americans were asked, how much of the time can you trust your government to do the right thing? 2 out of every 3 citizens agreed that you can trust the government all of the time or most of the time. And when that question is asked today, all of the time or most of the time is the response of barely 3 out of 10 Americans. We really have lost faith in our institutions in many cases, haven't we, today? So what's behind this dramatic transformation? Well, in my view, the federal government has become too big, too bloated, too complex, too bureaucratic. Decisions that were once made in state legislatures or in city halls or around kitchen tables are now made way off in Washington. And people feel that their government doesn't have confidence in their wisdom. Therefore, they don't have confidence in the government. What we need to do, it seems to me, is to remember the wisdom of our country's founders and the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Those powers not specifically delegated to the federal government belong to the states and to we the people, to you and me. And I think it's time to dust off the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. And speaking of our founders, have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? Bob and I found this particular document on an airplane. And my history, I have to admit, even though I had taught history, had gotten a little rusty. And so I had a couple of historians check this out for accuracy because I was so impressed. And I'm going to just quote a few paragraphs for you because it really does make you stop and think. 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors. They were tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. They signed and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. What kind of men were they? Well, 24 were lawyers. They were jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers, large plantation owners. They were men of means, and they were well educated. But they signed that Declaration of Independence knowing full well that if they were captured, the penalty would be death. Isn't that something? Now think about these examples. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships just swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts, and he died bankrupt. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, but poverty became his reward as well because he was forced to sell all of his belongings. And this one, at the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home as his headquarters. He went to General George Washington, and he said, "Open fire on my home." They did. They destroyed it. He died bankrupt. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. It's incredible. These men who invented America were not wild-eyed rabble-rousers. They were soft-spoken men of means and education. They placed greater value on liberty than security. And with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, they pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And courageous men and women of honor have continued to sacrifice for our country throughout our history. Now, what would these patriots think if they could see America today? What's happened to honor, duty, personal responsibility? Well, 3 and 4 decades ago, a generation came of age in this country with expectations as innocent as they were grand. We wanted for America more freedom, didn't we? More tolerance, more compassion. And there were amazing advances. We overturned legal segregation, and we made progress against discrimination. We've seen real gains for minorities and women, and we must never go back, not an inch. American ingenuity transformed the way people work, learn, and communicate in a world without walls. Who among us would turn back the clock? Yet this country, which has come so far, has lost so much. Our sense of limitless possibility has run into a stone wall of crime, violence, drugs, illegitimacy, and incivility. The deep and unsettling fear is that this nation, given to us by our founders, given to us by our parents, was a much better place than the America that we're preparing to turn over to our children. And the insult of this injury is that our intentions were good. We wanted our schools not only to teach, but to nurture children's self-esteem and solve a variety of social problems. And that self-esteem is very important. But when we start to try to resolve every single problem in our schools, it kind of distracts us a bit from the basics. Now, in many cases, a number of our schools, and I can say this from my own personal experiences, we have excellent schools, but we also have some that hardly teach at all in this country. When we were growing up, many of us, our education system was the envy of the world. We had the best system in the world. Now almost every parent whose child can't escape our schools is desperate to reform them. We wanted to end the silly censorship that kept Joyce's Ulysses in a brown paper wrapper. But we've ended up, ladies and gentlemen, with a pornographic culture and a society that no longer blushes. We ached for poor children hungry in the richness of America, and we created a welfare system to help them. But when we substituted handouts for jobs, we destroyed responsibility. When welfare programs offered a choice between cash and a husband, we devalued marriage. When fatherless children took control of the streets, we lost society's linchpin, respect for the law. We wanted to ensure that our courts were fair, our police were careful, that the innocent had a chance to be heard regardless of personal wealth or political power. But today we have a system of crime without punishment in many cases, victims without justice, and certainly neighborhoods without peace. We are a good and noble people, but we've forgotten that the strength of our rights depends on their limits, that the shifting sands of changing wants is no ground upon which to build a nation. We don't have to abandon our dreams, but we must not forget the values, the principles that allow us the luxury of dreaming. We want the world of our children to be a safe harbor, shielded from worry. Our parents managed that for us. We lived in homes with locks we didn't turn, on streets where we played safely till dark on long summer evenings. Remember those days? But what's happened to that simple gift? Children today have email and Nintendo, but what they lack is the ease of living in a world without worry. Why are we not giving our children what was given to us? Why? Well, there are many complex reasons, but I believe there's one reason above the others. In seeking to make America better, we've neglected what made her good. We've been embarrassed to talk about the values that make our lives happy and safe and fulfilled, the values of those patriots, responsibility and altruism, courage and perseverance, discipline, modesty, and a willingness to work not for our own gratification, but for the joy of knowing that our children will benefit. We must ask ourselves if in pursuing life's options, we've left behind the fundamentals. Now, I'm speaking as a nation. This is what's happened. But let me add right now that I think what you're doing in this program represents exactly the values that I've just discussed. And so I want to congratulate you again for that, because this is a model that can be used for so many communities across America. Responsibility, altruism, courage, perseverance, discipline, modesty, a willingness to work, not for your own gratification, but for the joy of knowing that your children will benefit. That's what you're doing in this program. But across America, I think this is definitely a challenge that we face, because we have left behind the fundamentals, I believe, in many respects. We have campus speech codes to keep us civil. We apply harassment rules to schoolyard kisses. And edicts from our courts now protect the freedom of molesters and stalkers and abusers so well that America's children and daughters and wives no longer trust America or our society to keep them safe. And I think there's a real undercurrent of fear among women today. I think about it as I travel, because we're more vulnerable, aren't we? I couldn't possibly go into a hotel room and just go to bed without looking under the bed, behind the drapes, everywhere, to be sure I'm alone in that room. It wasn't that way some years back. This substitution of regulation for responsibility is a kind of Puritanism for people who no longer believe in character, who no longer believe in the wisdom and goodness of the people. But we will never write enough rules, ladies and gentlemen. We can't legislate character, can we? We'll never write enough rules. Individual and national character are what we need. I think many of us have reached a point of reflection, a kind of collective head shaking. Are we content with what's happening on our watch? When we pass control of America to our children, will we be proud of the choices we made, of the country those choices produced? Are things beginning to change? I believe the answer is yes. Do your own thing is giving way to respect your parents. Family time is becoming a priority again. People are openly hungry for the inner peace that comes from faith. And countless children are going to sleep at night to the sound of a parent's voice reading from the Book of Virtues. And what is true in our lives can also be true in the life of our country. I strongly believe that we must choose education over social engineering. I believe we've got to teach our children again the basics of math and reading and citizenship and science. How appalling in this great United States of America that 1 in 4 high school seniors is considered functionally illiterate. Functionally illiterate. We've got to return discipline and parental involvement to every classroom in America. And in those cases, especially in low-income areas where schools have failed completely, I think parents are going to have to be given other choices. Give the schools a chance to bring their performance up so that the students are learning more and performing better. But if they're not able to do it after a reasonable period of time, then the money, the federal money that would be provided for that child can go in the backpack. And that means the parent can choose another public school, a private school, tutoring, a charter school. I think we have to be very, very serious about returning safety to our streets and moral seriousness to our war on drugs. 70% of violent criminals in jail today committed drug-related felonies. Drug use, cocaine and marijuana, among young adults and teenagers has significantly increased in recent years. Imagine 1/4 of 8th graders trying marijuana in our country. And it's mainly the poor and minorities who are victimized by the drugs and the gangs that profit from them. It is often the elderly who are targeted by criminals. As citizens of the greatest country on the face of the earth, we've got to trust ourselves and our values, not solely the government and its intentions. I believe we must direct resources and authority back to parents and principals, policemen and pastors, men and women with the power to turn a community around, like the men and women in this audience today, starting with a single life or a single classroom or a single street corner. None of us can claim perfection, and few can wear the mantle of hero or heroine, but each of us has the option of choosing a life of decency and self-discipline, self-reliance and diligence. From time to time, we all fail our own standards, but our standards will never fail us. Yes, our nation has been on a long and restless journey, but we've begun to rediscover the place that is our home. We can never return to an age of innocence, but we can move on to an age of rediscovery. With clear heads, open eyes, and full hearts, we can choose above all else those things that are most important, that will endure, that we will always see as noble. Our future, ladies and gentlemen, is not preordained. We must choose it. But I believe it is the American destiny to choose well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share thoughts with you today, and I'll be glad, Mike, to try to answer some questions now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dole. Any questions from the audience? I'll come over with the microphone. We have any questions for Mrs. Dole?
We hear quite frequently in this country that the U.S. is not ready for a woman president. Yet we have seen such great leaders as Maggie Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir. What's holding up the U.S.?
Okay, first of all, since I've had a little personal experience on the campaign trail, I'll have to bring my own experience into it. I think the country is ready. I truly do. As I've traveled the country, I'll just share my thoughts with you, and then, of course, this will lead to why did I drop out, and I'll try to explain that. First of all, throughout 1999, and I don't mean to be partisan at all here, so please forgive me if it sounds that way, but I was very proud of the fact that I beat Al Gore, the sitting vice president, in every single poll in 1999. I never saw, if any of you saw one, tell me. So that told me, you know, that people were ready for a woman. And then in Iowa, the straw poll last August, we didn't have millions of dollars to spend, and yet we came in a very strong third without spending the millions. And what we were doing, we were attracting a lot of people who had been turned off on politics. You know, I was talking about, for example, young people who are turning away today and feel like, you know, I don't want anything to do with that. The cynicism, the doubt among many adults as well, because our institutions have been tarnished, and people are just very cynical today about the whole area of politics. And we found that many of these people were excited and energized and coming to help. And young people by the scores, women of all ages, and a lot of them were Democrats and independents, you know, across the board. They were joining our campaign. So I thought, are we going to be able to translate these huge crowds that we're seeing at our town hall meetings all across America, and especially in Iowa, when they go to vote in that straw poll, will people really cross the state and go into a process that they've never been involved in before, spend a whole Saturday and cast a vote for me in a straw poll? And you know something? They did it. And it was a very exciting day to see that happen, because it showed that there really was this support for a woman, you know. So why then, when the crowds were big and we were bringing in new people into the political process, people who'd sort of almost given up on politics, given it another chance, our organization was great. We had chairmen in all the 99 counties in Iowa and precinct chairs in 600 of the 2,100 precincts. Our organization was coming along very well, and I withdrew. This was the reason. I think that, you know, there's a limit on how much a person can give to a political campaign, all right? Women traditionally, and a lot of my support was from women, as I mentioned, of all ages and all parties, women traditionally give 23% of the funding for campaigns. It's still very much a man's function, you know, being involved in the fundraising for politics. In my campaign, 51% of the donors were women. So we doubled the participation, and that was a positive thing. And I want to keep women involved because they need to have a seat at the policy table. Women's voices need to be heard. And when they give to a campaign, it gives them a vested interest in what's going to happen. So here's the problem. We didn't have huge amounts of money, but Iowa and New Hampshire normally are for, you know, retail politicking, where you're not, you don't have to have just millions and millions of dollars. You can meet the voters and talk to people in the town halls and try to get your message across and let them see you up close. Why didn't it work for me? I say something has to change here, and that is that some of the pundits, now there are a lot in the media, in the press and the media, who are as concerned about this as I am, but some of the pundits made money the message. And it didn't matter that you had 30 or more years of experience to bring to the table. It didn't matter that you had huge crowds. It didn't matter that you were bringing new people into the political process, because money became the message. And the big news stories were how much money you've raised and what your report says when you file with the Federal Election Commission about money. That's wrong. Money should not be the message, because that knocked out about 5 of us, really, who'd had experience in government. But that's the way it is. So, you know, I really think that with the First Amendment rights of the media, the press, come responsibilities and accountability. And I do think that they made money the message, and that really was what sort of closed me out. And you realize that you just can't compete under those conditions. And I thought about it long and hard and decided the best thing to do was to withdraw. It was a great experience. I'm not at all sorry that I did it. And I hope that the people that we attracted to the political process will stay engaged. But I think this is a long way to answer your question, but it's the most direct way that I can. I think the country's ready from everything that I experienced out there.
Thank you, Ms. Dole. Any other question? Okay.
Would you accept a position as vice president?
Oh, it's far too early to even speculate on this. You know, I'm supporting George Bush. In fact, I was in Michigan for him yesterday, and I'll be in New Hampshire tomorrow, Sunday, and South Carolina Monday. And I think he'll make a great president. I really do. He has executive experience, which is something I relate to. And that's what the position of president's all about. You know, it's a CEO position. But he has to win the nomination. And when he does, he's going to have a whole group of talented leaders from which to choose. So it's far too early to even speculate, and I think there are a lot of people that he'll want to consider when he does win the nomination.
Questions? Anyone else?
Thank you. Gina Hahn, Republican State Committee woman.
Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth. I would like you to give us some input on exactly what makes Forbes tick. I think he is about the most, but we won't say that. Just what, I mean, I felt that in the campaign, which, you know, Bob was involved in, he was not a very nice, decent person, and he is doing the same thing again against George.
The advertisements?
George. Yeah. I mean, negative does not, the Democrats then take that and work it against us in the general.
Well, did everybody hear the question about Steve Forbes running negative advertisements? I went through the campaign without saying a single negative word about any one of the candidates. And that's where I want to stay, because I feel strongly about that. I think that you can have a vigorous debate on the issues because everybody's record differs, and that's where you certainly want to say, now wait a minute, you know, George Bush has executive experience, and that matters, you know, or whatever it is that you're trying to project. But you don't have to get personal, you don't have to get negative, and this just denigrates the whole process, and it's the reason that a lot of people aren't willing to go into politics, so we have to do something about that. Now, having said this, because of an ad that was run recently, my husband, who has not said one word about what was done to him in 1996, did send a letter to the Des Moines Register before the caucuses, and that letter indicated that he was afraid, just as you say, the same thing is about to happen again that happened to him in 96. And what happened to him is that, and forgive me if I don't have this exactly on target, but my memory is that Bob had favorable ratings in Iowa of 80%, which is very high. His unfavorables, people who viewed him unfavorably, was 17%, which is very low. Mr. Forbes ran millions and millions of dollars of ads in 6 primary states, one of them being Iowa. It drove his favorables from 80 to 50. is unfavorable from 17 to 47. And the ads were misleading, they were distorted, they were negative, they weren't accurate. Bob has never talked about that until he saw it starting to happen in Iowa. And so he sent a letter. He didn't mention names, but he just said, this is something that should not happen. And it's a matter of taking a snippet and, taking it out of context and making it, it distorts. And it's misleading. And there's no place, in my view, for it in politics. We should not do that. So that's my answer. That's, as I say, I've never said anything negative, but this is a fact of life, what happened. And now that Bob has felt he had to speak up about it, then I'll share with you that it hurt a lot. And why did it hurt Bob so much? Because we had to spend everything that he had fighting those negative ads. And in 6 different states, in Iowa, New Hampshire, Arizona, I think Delaware was one, there were 6 altogether. And at the time that Bob won the nomination, which was March 26th, there was no money left. And then Clinton began running ads that were very negative and wrong, and there was no money to fight it from March until the convention when you get your money as the nominee. And so it was highly detrimental. It really was.
County went 80% to Dole, so we were, with Dole country.
Thanks. But just to carry it a little bit further, because the Clinton ads, what was concerning me about that was that my husband had worked very hard to restructure Medicare, and the Congress voted to do that. They sent the legislation to the president. He vetoed the legislation and offered no viable alternative. You all come on and be a part of this if you have some experience in this. That hurt as well, because the negative ads that were run that summer had to do with Medicare. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons that Bob lost Florida. And here he had provided leadership as the Senate Majority Leader to literally restructure and fix the program. Clinton vetoed it, didn't offer a viable alternative, and ran ads against him, which hurt him with women particularly on the Medicare issue. So, that's something that we've experienced, and I hope that kind of activity will be terminated because I think it does discourage a lot of people from becoming involved in politics. And there's no necessity for it. You can win on the issues, on debating the issues and what's important to people, and stay out of the negative stuff. Anything else?
Time for one more
Okay.
question.
One more in the back.
I often wonder why we don't combat that instead of negative ads, putting up billboards, 2-page ads, etc., saying, thank you, Republican Congress, for this wonderful economy. Rather than the negativity, I think we should start pushing the positive.
Mm-hmm.
If we dot this country with billboards, proclaiming all of the good things that have been done, I think that might be a better way to go than the negative ads that we see.
Well, I certainly agree that we should do no negative ads. People should run on their records, and anything we can do to highlight. I mean, I think if you look back to Ronald Reagan's era, he cut the tax rates about 25%. What that did was give people the opportunity to keep more of their hard-earned dollars, which families, and right now, families are paying almost 40% of their income in taxes today. But back at that time, with that tax rate cut, people could keep more of their dollars. They were able to invest. Companies could invest and expand and hire more people, and it provided the venture capital for the technology revolution that's literally driving, it's the engine driving our economy today. So these kinds of positive things we do need to talk about. And of course that feeds right into to what we're hoping will happen now, which is another tax rate cut, so that everybody gets a tax reduction, but especially those who are on the lowest income, who would get the most. Okay? Sure.
As far as the candidates that are running, do you not think that we need a candidate with a lot more experience in foreign affairs than what has been going on in this country with our relationship to the rest of the world? specifically how he got involved in the Balkans with the UN, and do you feel that that was successful?
The Kosovo situation, well, the question is experience in foreign policy, and also the Kosovo situation. And let me say that, first of all, my husband for a long time kept saying, if you lift the embargo to let the Bosnians have the weapons that they need to defend themselves, we're not going to have to get involved in this at all. That did not happen, and as you know, the concern was it would be like dominoes. First of all, it's Bosnia, then it's Kosovo, and then the concern was it might be Macedonia, Albania next. And Kosovo is in the heart of NATO. It's really in the center of NATO's sphere of influence. It really, in my view, is very clearly a strategic national interest for the United States in terms of the stability of Europe. So I think what we did in terms of Kosovo, as far as being involved, yes, but I have to disagree, and again, by asking me this question, then you put me in a situation where I've got to be critical here, but I think the Colin-Powell doctrine of if you're going to do it, and where it intersects your national interests and your values, where they intersect, that's where I would say the United States has to take leadership. And we certainly had an issue of values here as well as a strategic interest being in the sphere of NATO's influence in the heart of Europe. But I think the Colin-Powell doctrine would call for go in quickly, give it your full effort, and get out. That's not what happened. It was a slow process over many, many days. We took the possibility of ground troops off the table. Why would you take it off the table even if you never intend to use the ground troops? You don't signal Milosevic, the enemy, that you're not going to use ground troops, because then what he was able to do was reconfigure his troops, move them into Kosovo, destroy villages, kill people. I mean, literally what happened was they knew they didn't have to worry about defending against NATO troops. So strategically, it was a real mistake to take ground troops off the table, in my view. I was over in Macedonia and met with these refugees, the Albanian Kosovars, and you wouldn't believe the experiences. Or, well, you read about them and saw it on television, actually. But, I mean, there'd be a knock on the door, and here come the troops. You're pulled out of your home. You're marched off. Your husband's marched in a different direction to heaven knows what fate. Your home is burning behind you. Your cattle are being slaughtered. Your business is being smashed. You know, I mean, it was unbelievable. These people had nothing but the clothes on their back. That's all. They were just driven out. And so these horrible things were going on. And, you know, we didn't bomb the communications areas. We should have gotten the television, the radios out early because they were sending out all this propaganda throughout all this period of time. But my view was, and I said early on, we should, you know, Milosevic should be indicted as a war criminal. And in my view, we should have just had many more sorties early rather than sort of over such a long period of time. Get it done and get out. So that's where I stand on that one. But I think clearly when your values and your national interests intersect, then the United States has to lead. That's when we need to stand up and lead. And we can't be the world's policeman. You know, there's got to be a criteria for when we go in. We can't be everywhere. And I think it is important that we review all these deployments and determine exit strategies. In some cases, we have no exit strategy. Was there a question in the back over here? Really? And you felt there just wasn't a vehicle. We tried to keep getting the website out. No. Only if you take matching funds later on, or, you know, do you get any government funds? In my case, it was all, and also from the party, it would be later, but mine was all, you know, just what I could raise in this period of time. And we tried to get the website out constantly so that people would know, you know, how to use the website to contribute. But I'm sorry to hear that, and well, let me just thank you for being willing to do that. I appreciate it. It warms my heart. Thanks. Thanks.
And Mrs. Dole, thank you for
Yes,
everything
indeed.
today.
It's
Very
a
nice.
pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
with you all today. Have a great day now. Thanks.